They dismissed him as just another guy off the street. But when the smoke rolled in and lives were on the line, he was the only one who acted. The sun hung heavy in the sky, casting long, sleepy shadows across the rows of neat houses. It was the kind of afternoon that clung to your skin thick with heat, the kind that made time slow and breath shallow. Cicadas sang their relentless chorus from the trees, their hums rising and falling like the rhythm of a dream. Sprinklers hissed and clicked, watering emerald lawns that seemed too perfect to be real. Somewhere down the block, children shrieked, with laughter, chasing each other through streams of water, bare feet slapping against the pavement. Jamal adjusted the strap of the toolbox slung across his shoulder and walked a little slower, wiping a bead of sweat from his brow. The heat didn't bother him much, he was used to it. What lingered heavier than the weather was the weight of invisible stares. The neighborhood was peaceful. Yes, but not for him. Not really. Jamal had lived 2 blocks over for nearly 4 years now, tucked into a modest duplex he rented behind the small auto shop he ran. He fixed cars, replaced brake pads, and built bikes for kids who couldn't afford one. A man of few words and steady hands. But here, among the white shutters and gleaming minivans, he still felt like an intruder in someone else's photo frame. He passed Mrs. Calloway's yard. She was pruning her roses, wide-brimmed hat shielding her face. She didn't look up, just tightened her grip on the shears. Jamal nodded anyway. Afternoon, he offered politely. She hesitated, then returned a stiff smile, just enough to check the box of civility. He walked on. It was always like this. Polite smiles that stopped. At the lips, eyes that watched him a few seconds too long. No one ever said anything outright, but they didn't have to. Jamal had learned long ago that racism didn't always wear a hood or shout from a truck window. Sometimes, it wore a sundress and carried a casserole dish, smiling while it locked its car doors behind you. Still, Jamal never let it harden him. His mama hadn't raised him like that. He kept his head down, did good work, and minded his business. Today, he had just dropped off a repaired bike for the little boy across the street. Athan, sweet kid, all teeth and giggles. The boy had hugged him like he was a superhero, and, for a moment, Jamal had forgotten the weight on his shoulders. He lived for small moments like that. The sidewalk shimmered ahead of him. Somewhere nearby, a lawnmower droned. A dog barked lazily behind a fence. He paused at the corner and pulled out his keys, fidgeting with the keychain that had a photo of his daughter, 11 years old, smart as a whip. He'd raised her mostly on his own after her mother passed. She was his whole world, and the reason he never ever let his guard down. A car slowed as it passed him. A white SUV. The driver didn't wave, just stared, then drove on Jamal's side quietly and kept walking. He'd learned to live between the lines, never run, never shout, never give them a reason to feel threatened. The hum of life carried on around him, normal, almost comforting. The neighborhood was wrapped in a kind of stillness that only came on summer afternoons when nothing seemed urgent and everything felt safe. But Jamal had learned something else, too. Stillness can lie, and beneath the perfect hedges, the distant laughter, and the hum of sprinklers, something wasn't quite right. He just didn't know it yet. Jamal stepped off the sidewalk, cutting across a patch of grass, still damp from the sprinklers. The sun beat down on the back of his neck as he adjusted the strap on his shoulder. The smile Nathan had given him just minutes earlier still lingered on his face. Moments like that when a kid looked at him with nothing but joy and gratitude were rare, and he held on to them like they were gold. He reached into his pocket to grab his keys when something odd tugged at his senses. A smell, faint, acrid, sharp at the edges. He paused, turning slowly. It wasn't the usual scent of charcoal and grilled burgers that often drifted through the neighborhood this time of day. This was different, chemical, bitter, wrong. Maybe someone was burning yard waste. But even as he tried to rationalize it, his instincts prickled. Jamal had worked around engines and oil his whole life. He knew the scent of things going bad. This wasn't a backyard bonfire. This was synthetic insulation, dry wood, plastic all turning black. Then came the sound, a pop, then another, subtle, but sharp. Not quite an explosion, more like pressure giving way. Drywall cracking, windows shifting from heat. His brows drew together. Jamal turned toward the street, narrowing his eyes toward the row of pristine houses. That, when he saw it, just a wisp at first. A delicate curl of gray smoke, drifting lazily from the edge of a roof 3 houses down. barely noticeable against the bright sky, like breath on cold glass. But it was there, and it was coming from the Blake's place, a large, white colonial-style home with blue shutters and flower boxes on every window. He stepped into the street, eyes fixed on the rooftop. More smoke. Then came another crack, louder, this time like wood snapping under pressure. The shingles near the chimney seemed to shimmer unnaturally in the sunlight. Jamal's heartbeat started to pick up. That house, he knew it. A family of 5. The parents were polite, distant, the kind who never really looked him in the eye. 2 little boys around, Nathan's age and a baby girl who always had a ribbon in her hair. He looked around. No one else seemed to notice. A man across the street was mowing his lawn, earbuds in. 2 women sat sipping iced tea on a porch, talking casually. Everyone too wrapped in their own little bubble to see the danger blooming right in front of them. Jamal's eyes darted back to the house. Now the smoke was thicker, curling with intent. No longer lazy wisps, but steady tendrils. He moved toward the curb, heart pounding. His mind raced through possibilities. Maybe they already knew. Maybe they were inside calling 911. But what if they weren't? What if they were asleep? What if that baby was up there alone? He reached for his phone with shaky fingers, unlocked it, and punched in the numbers. 9-1-1. The ring felt like it lasted forever. 911. What's your emergency? Jamal kept his voice calm, controlled, despite the urgency bubbling under his skin. Yes, I'm on Maple Ridge Lane. I think there's a fire starting at one of the houses. There's smoke coming from the roof of number 322. A pause. Are you sure it's not just a grill or something? Jamal clenched his jaw. No, I know what fire smells like. This isn't food. There's popping sounds, too structural. You need to send someone now. There are kids in that house. Another pause. A long one. The dispatcher's voice came back, drier this time. Okay, sir. We'll dispatch someone to check it out. Please do not approach the property. The call ended with a click. Jamal stared at the screen, disbelief crawling up his spine. That was it. No confirmation. No sense of urgency. No sirens. He stayed rooted in place for another 30 seconds. Still no movement. No flashing lights. No engine roaring down the street. Just the lawnmower drone. The giggles of kids chasing water. The world pretending nothing was wrong. But something was wrong. The smoke was darker now, almost black at the edges. It was rising steadily, leaking out from under the eaves like a warning. Jamal's hands curled into fists. He took one last glance up and down the street. No help was coming. And deep in his gut, he knew someone was still inside that house. Jamal stood on the edge of the sidewalk, one hand shielding his eyes from the sun as he stared at the rising smoke. It was no longer wisps now, it was columns, thick and gray, drifting into the sky like a warning flag. He pulled out his phone, again, thumb trembling slightly as he dialed 911. The tone buzzed in his ear, long and slow. His jaw was tight. Every second stretched into 1,000 beats of his racing heart. The line clicked. A voice, cool and indifferent, came through. 911, what's your emergency? Jamal took a breath and kept his voice level. There's a house. On Maple Ridge Lane number 322. There's visible smoke coming out of the roof. I believe it's a fire. There are kids inside. The dispatcher's voice didn't match the urgency in his. Are you sure it's not just someone burning trash? She asked flatly. Jamal blinked. No, ma'am. I've worked around engines and combustion most of my life. I know what smoke from burning plastic and insulation smells like. This is not trash. And I just heard. He stopped, straining. There, it was again, faint but clear, a child's voice, sharp with fear. A scream, then crying. Listen, Jamal said, his voice rising slightly. There are children inside. You need to send help now. There was a pause on the line. Too long. It made Jamal want to scream. We've logged the call, she replied, still cold. A unit will be dispatched when available. Please remain at a safe distance and do not attempt to enter the property. Cliff. The call ended before he could say another word. Jamal stared at the screen, the glowing red of the call timer vanishing like the last ounce of his trust in the system. When available, he muttered to himself. He looked around again, searching for the sound of sirens, anything. But the only things that filled the air were the drone of that damn lawnmower down the block and the laughter of children who didn't realize what was happening just 2 houses over. His gaze snapped back to the Blake's home. The smoke was pouring out now, dark and thick, smearing the air like oil. No one was coming. His breathing quickened. He looked down the street. Nothing. No flashing lights, no responders. Just a man alone, watching disaster unfold while the world looked the other way. He couldn't believe it. He had done everything right, called quickly, gave the address clearly, even explained the danger. But that voice on the other end of the line had made a decision. Maybe she didn't believe him. Maybe she thought he was exaggerating. Or maybe she just heard his voice, pictured his face, and didn't think it was worth rushing. Jamal felt it like a stone in his gut. He began to pace the sidewalk, fingers twitching. He looked back at the phone. His thumb hovered. He didn't want to believe he had to call again, but the smoke was now crawling down the side of the house like fingers, clawing through the siding. He dialed again, the same automated tone, the same slow response. 911, what's your emergency? He didn't wait this time. This is the second time I'm calling. The house is on fire. 322 Maple Ridge. Smoke is pouring out of the roof. I heard kids inside. There's no help yet. No fire trucks. What's going on? The dispatcher's voice was familiar. Same as before. Distant, mechanical. We're aware of your earlier call. Sir, units have been notified. We'll send a response when one is available. When one is available, Jamal said sharply. This is life or death. The fire is growing. They need help now. There was a silence on the line, cold and impenetrable. Then, sir, I've logged your report. Please do not put yourself in danger. He wanted to scream, but he didn't. He ended the call with shaking hands, lowering the phone slowly, as if it was something poisonous, and still no sirens. Jamal looked at the house again. Through the smoke, he could see faint movement in one of the upstairs windows. A shape, small, a flash of color, maybe a child's pajama sleeve. He felt his heart snap open, like a window blown wide in a storm. He looked around. Cars were parked, in driveways, doors were closed, curtains twitched, but no one came out. No one else was calling. No one else was helping. He was standing in the middle of a neighborhood filled with people who wanted peace and quiet more than they wanted to believe a man like him was telling the truth. He took one step toward the house, then another. Whatever happened next, he knew one thing for certain. He couldn't wait any longer. The world narrowed to smoke and silence. Jamal stood frozen at the curb, the sun beating against his back, but the warmth no longer registered. The smoke was now black, roiling from the roof like a living thing. It twisted and churned, catching the wind, turning the once pristine sky a sickly gray. The scent was unbearable. Now burnt plastic, scorched drywall. Something else, something deeper, something alive that was dying. Then he saw it. Flames. Just for a second, barely more than a flicker, he caught a glimpse of orange, tongues licking the inside of a second-story window. The thin, gauzy curtains fluttered, caught fire in a heartbeat, and disappeared in a hiss of sparks. Jamal's breath caught. His stomach turned to ice, and then came the sound. A child's scream, high-pitched, raw, filled with terror. It wasn't muffled. It was close, inside the house. That was it. That was the moment something broke loose inside him. He ran across the street, his boots thudding against the asphalt. His chest heaved, adrenaline flooding every cell. He charged up the driveway, heart in his throat, every step faster than the last. He pounded on the front door. Hello, is anyone in there? There's a fire. You need to get out. Nothing. Smoke seeped through the edges of the doorframe. The house stood still, as if holding its breath. There was no answer, no footsteps, no creak of wood, nothing but the crackle of something burning from within. He banged again, harder, fists slamming against the wood. Open up. Your house is on fire. Still nothing. Jamal glanced at the windows, already darkened by smoke, and made a snap decision. He bolted round the side, his shoulder brushing past the garden fence, nearly tripping over a fallen tricycle. Every movement now was sharp, deliberate. Instinct had taken over. He reached the backyard. The grass was browning from the heat. The air was thick, as if the world itself was holding back oxygen. His eyes stung, watering uncontrollably. But then he saw it. The back screen door, unlocked, hanging open. Without thinking, he lunged forward and pushed through it, plunging into the belly of the house. Immediately, it was like stepping into a different dimension. The air inside was hot, like opening an oven with your face too close. Smoke hugged the ceiling and spiraled downward, making every breath an effort. Light flickered and died in the haze. The kitchen, once spotless and full of life, was now a surreal nightmare. Cabinets half open, pots scattered, the floor coated in ash and soot. And then wah! A child's cry, close near the island counter. Jamal turned his head, blinking hard, trying to focus through the blur. Their 2 toddlers crouched near the lower cabinet, their faces twisted in fear and streaked with dirt and tears. One held a stuffed animal so tight its stuffing was bursting from the seams. The other crawled toward him on shaking legs. He dropped to his knees beside them. "It's okay, babies. I've got you," he whispered, his voice soft but urgent. "I'm here now." The older toddler reached for him instinctively, tears still streaming. Jamal swept both of them into his arms, one on each hip. They were light, but their panic made them cling tightly to him, little hands grasping at his shirt, his skin, anything solid. He stood, wobbling slightly, trying to orient himself. The smoke was crawling down the hallways now, rolling in from under doors like a wave. Somewhere upstairs would groaned a dangerous sound, the kind you only hear when something is starting to give. Jamal didn't have time to hesitate. He bolted back the way he came, holding the children tight to his chest. The baby on his right coughed violently. The one on the left cried into his shoulder. His lungs screamed with each breath, but he didn't stop, not for a second. He kicked the screen door open with his boot and staggered out into the backyard, lungs drawing in a single gulp of clean air. He carried them across the lawn, away from the heat, and set them down gently on a shaded patch of grass. "You're okay now. You're safe," he said, kneeling beside them. "Stay right here." But even as they whimpered and curled into each other, he heard something else, a second voice, faint, gasping, upstairs. A woman. "Help, please someone, my baby." Jamal turned his head back toward the house. The flames were beginning to burst from the upstairs window now, glass shattering outward in a violent explosion of sparks. The heat hit his face like a slap, and he knew it wasn't over. There was still someone else inside, and Jamal was going back in. Jamal didn't even pause. The moment he heard the mother's cracking, and desperate something in him surged forward. His body moved before his thoughts could catch up. He tore off his overshirt, wrapped it around his nose and mouth, and ran back into the burning house. The heat struck him like a wall. It had grown in the seconds he'd been outside. Flames licked up the staircase like serpents, spitting sparks and ash into the air. The smoke was heavier now, thicker, pressing down on him like a wet blanket. It tasted like metal and plastic, and fear. He dropped low, one arm shielding his face as he charged through the ruined kitchen and into the hallway. The woman's voice came again, barely above a whisper, but full of terror. "Please, someone, my baby." The sound came from upstairs. Jamal looked at the staircase. It was already partially scorched, the banister blackened and splintering. The steps moaned under the weight of the fire chewing at the frame above. One wrong move, and the whole thing could collapse. He took the risk, step by step. He ascended, every movement calculated, swift, desperate. Smoke coiled around him, invading every gap in his shirt, every inch of exposed skin. His eyes stung, his throat burned, and his heart pounded louder than the flames. He reached the landing, coughing violently, barely able to see. Hallway walls peeled from the heat. Pictures melted in their frames. Then a cry. This time not the mother, a baby, weak, strained, but alive. He turned toward the nursery. The door was ajar, smoke billowing out like a living beast. Inside, the light was flickering, and flames crawled along the corner of the ceiling. A crib stood in the center of the room, cloaked in a haze of smoke. The mother was there, frozen, standing inches from the crib, staring at her child but unable to move. Her hands trembled, her legs shook, tears streamed down her cheeks. She was locked in place by panic, paralyzed by the moment. Jamal didn't speak. There was no time. He moved toward her fast, slipping on scattered toys and scorched floorboards. His lungs screamed, but he forced them to keep working. Reached the woman just as a beam overhead groaned ominously. Ma'am, we have to go now." She turned to him, eyes wide and hollow. Her mouth moved, but no sound came out. Jamal leaned over the crib and scooped the baby, barely a year old, into his left arm. The child was hot to the touch, wheezing, clutching at the air. "Hold on, baby girl," Jamal whispered through clenched teeth. With his free hand, he reached for the mother. "Come on." She still didn't move, so he grabbed her by the arm and pulled. Her legs stumbled to life, barely keeping pace. She clung to him, coughing, crying, her body limp with shock. Jamal dragged her down the hallway, shielding the baby from falling debris with his body. A door frame crashed behind them, splinters scattering across the floor like shrapnel. The stairs groaned again as he reached the top of the landing. One step had already caved in, flames licking up from beneath. He adjusted the baby in his grip, gritted his teeth, and jumped over the broken section, pulling the mother behind him. They slammed into the wall halfway down, stumbling, but he didn't stop. The entire house felt like it was shaking now. Every creak, every snap of wood, every burst of flame told him the clock was ticking. There were seconds left, not minutes. He barreled into the kitchen, boots slipping on the ash-covered tile. His lungs burned, his vision blurred. The screen door was ahead open, sunlight pouring in like salvation. He ran, out the door, onto the grass. Into air. Sweet, clean, life-giving air. He collapsed to his knees on the lawn, clutching the baby to his chest. The mother fell beside him, coughing uncontrollably, reaching out blindly until her hand found her children and wrapped around them like she could never let go again. The toddler still, sitting where he'd left them, cried out and scrambled toward their mother. She gathered all three children to her, weeping, shaking, kissing their hair as if trying to anchor herself back to reality. Jamal leaned forward, coughing violently, tears streaming down his soot-streaked face, not from emotion, but from pure survival. Then crack. A bone-deep sound echoed behind them. He looked up, eyes wide. The roof collapsed. Half the second story caved in on itself, flames roaring with renewed hunger as debris crashed through what was once the nursery. The sound of wood splintering, glass exploding, and fire consuming echoed across the neighborhood. Had he waited even 30 seconds longer, they all would have died. Silence settled in after the roar, broken only by the sobs of the mother and the soft cries of her children. And finally sirens wailed in the distance. But by then, the real saving had already been done. By the man no one listened to, the man they'd all silently questioned, watched with suspicion, doubted in their hearts. The black man who didn't wait for permission to be a hero. The first fire engine arrived 23 minutes after Jamal had made his initial call. By then, the house was already half gone. Flames still roared from the second story, licking at the sky with greedy hands. Smoke curled into the air like a dying scream, thick and dark enough to blot out the sun. The roof had caved in completely, splintered beams exposed like ribs. The family's belongings, photos, toys, memories had turned to ash long before the sirens echoed down the block. Jamal sat on the grass, chest heaving, shirt torn and soaked with sweat and soot. His skin was streaked with gray. His knuckles were scraped raw. Every breath felt like dragging fire into his lungs. But he didn't move. The mother sat nearby, her arms wrapped tight around all three of her children, her entire body trembling. She rocked them gently, whispering their names, over and over again like a mantra. Her voice cracked between sobs. She hadn't let go of them for even a second. Neighbors began to gather, emerging from behind their doors, drawn by the sirens and the towering smoke. Some stood on porches, others crept closer, forming silent clusters at the edge of the lawn. A few covered their mouths in shock, others exchanged guilty glances. I thought someone else would call, man whispered. I saw the smoke, but I didn't know it was that serious. A woman muttered. Another leaned closer to his friend. That's the guy who lives over on Bay Ridge, isn't it? The mechanic. A soft murmur of recognition passed through the group, tinged with disbelief. Some had never spoken to Jamal. Others only knew him as that quiet black guy who keeps to himself. Now they looked at him like he was something else entirely. Still, no one stepped forward. Then came the squad car. It pulled up slowly, lights flashing. A uniformed officer stepped out, a tall man with a stern jaw and mirrored sunglasses. He surveyed the scene with a tight frown before walking toward Jamal. His boots crunched over the dry grass as he approached. Jamal, still catching his breath, looked up slowly. Sir, the officer said, tone flat. I need to see some ID. Jamal blinked. His body was still shaking from the heat, the adrenaline, the raw edge of survival. He didn't even register the question at first. ID, he asked, voice hoarse. The officer's stance was stiff, not hostile but defensive. Ready. Standard procedure, he said. You were seen entering the residence. We need to document. He never got to finish. The mother rose unsteady but firm. Her cheeks were streaked with ash and tears. Her shirt was singed. Her arms were wrapped protectively around her youngest, who whimpered softly against her chest. She walked straight toward the officer, voice shaking but fierce. "No." The officer paused. "Ma'am, no," she repeated, louder this time. "He doesn't owe you anything." The crowd stirred behind them. She pointed at Jamal, her eyes blazing. "He saved us," she said, voice breaking. "All of us. I couldn't move. My baby was choking. I was frozen. And he ran into that burning house twice because no one else did." Her voice caught in her throat, but she forced it out. "I called out. I screamed, and no one came. But he did. He came. When the smoke got thick, when the roof was about to fall in, when we would have died, he came." The officer shifted uncomfortably. "I understand that, ma'am. But no, you don't," she said, "because he called for help, and no one came. Because you all didn't believe him." Her words sliced through the silence like a blade. A hush fell over the lawn. Jamal looked down, jaw tight. His fingers dug into the grass, as if grounding himself. Not out of shame but from exhaustion. From years of being looked at with suspicion. Before anything else, the officer finally removed his sunglasses. His eyes flicked between the mother, the children, and the man covered in soot who sat slumped in the grass. His expression softened only slightly. But the hesitation was clear. He hadn't come to thank, he had come to question. But now the facts were undeniable. This man had done what no one else had. He gave a short nod. "Well, file a commendation," he muttered awkwardly, stepping back, and get you checked by medics. He turned away before anyone could see the full weight of what had just been said. The crowd stood in silence as more firefighters poured in, hoses finally drenching the collapsing structure. The crackling of flames began to fade under the hiss of water, but nothing could erase what had already burned inside the house or out here on this lawn. Jamal didn't want a medal. He didn't need thanks. All he'd wanted was for someone to believe him. But in the end, when no one did, he acted anyway. The next morning, the smell of smoke still lingered in the air like a ghost that refused to leave. What was once a pristine family home had been reduced to a blackened shell-charred timber, shattered windows, and the skeleton of a staircase leading to nowhere. But even as the embers cooled, something else began to stir, not in the ruins, but across the internet. It started with a neighbor. Her name was Claire Montgomery. She lived directly across the street, the kind of person who decorated for every holiday and clipped her hedges with military precision. She hadn't come outside during the fire. She said later she was too scared. But her doorbell camera, that had seen everything. At first, Claire wasn't going to share the footage, but then she heard the murmurs, the whispers from the other neighbors, the cold way the police officer had asked Jamal for ID, the silence that followed his act of heroism. So she opened the app, pulled up the timeline, and hit play. What she saw made her chest tighten. There Jamal was pacing on the sidewalk, phone to his ear, his posture tense, his hand on his head. He kept looking at the smoke rising from the Blake's roof, clearly agitated. His mouth moved rapidly, urgently. The footage had no audio, but the panic was unmistakable. Then, a new clip. Jamal looking at his phone again, frustrated. He dials. Again, his shoulders sag. His head tilts slightly. He's listening to something. Then she remembered her camera's mic had caught ambient audio. When she turned up the volume, her stomach dropped. The dispatcher's voice came through faintly. "Will send someone when available. Please do not attempt to enter the property." The indifference was chilling. Then came the most damning image. Jamal dropping the phone, shoving it into his pocket, looking at the house one last time, eyes narrowed, and then, without a second thought, running toward the fire. No backup, no equipment, no protection, just a man and his conviction. Claire uploaded the footage. She titled it plainly, "He called, they ignored." So he ran in anyway. She posted it to her neighborhood app and, reluctantly, to her public Facebook. By midday, the video had spread across every platform: Twitter, TikTok, Reddit, local news. Within hours, it was national. Thousands commented, "This man is a hero. The dispatcher should be fired. How many times does this have to happen before we listen to black men when they speak?" He didn't hesitate, but they did. But it didn't stop there. An investigative journalist from a local TV station, curious about the man behind the smoke-covered face, dug deeper, and what she found only made the story burn brighter. Jamal Thomas had once been a firefighter. 5 years ago, he'd worked for Station 47 in a town not far from where the fire had happened. His record was spotless commendations for bravery, several life-saving rescues, glowing peer reviews. Until one call changed everything. He had responded to a house fire in an upscale neighborhood. When he'd arrived ahead of his team, he found a white teenage girl unconscious on the second floor. He carried her out just minutes before the roof caved in. But when her father arrived on scene, he saw Jamal Black, covered in soot, holding his daughter and assumed the worst. He accused Jamal of breaking in, of harming her, of taking something. The accusations were baseless, but they spread fast, louder than the truth. The department, under pressure, placed Jamal on administrative leave pending review. The review dragged on. Weeks turned into months. Eventually he resigned, not because he was guilty, but because the weight of being distrusted had become heavier than the unit uniform itself. The public never heard the full story until now. The news anchor ended the segment with a still of Jamal, sitting on the grass outside the burning home, cradling a child to his chest. He was silenced once, but not this time. The video ended, and the world reacted. Strangers flooded his small auto shop with messages of support. Donations poured in. People dropped off meals. Volunteers offered to repaint his garage. A local artist started a mural of him on the side of a building. Flame in the background, child in his arms. But Jamal, he didn't want any of it. When a reporter asked for a quote, he just shook his head. "I didn't do it for cameras," he said. "I didn't even know anyone was watching." He looked down at his hands, calloused, scarred, steady. "I did it because someone had to, because they were burning, and no one else came." He paused. "And if that makes me a hero, maybe the bar was too low to begin with." Jamal didn't want the interview. He had said no 3 times before finally agreeing on the condition that it be short, and that they didn't try to frame him as something he wasn't. No dramatic music, no slow-motion replay of him running into the fire, no black savior headline, just the truth. The camera crew came on a Wednesday morning, quiet and respectful. The reporter, a woman with tired eyes and a warm voice, asked him to sit outside his shop, where the sunlight filtered through the leaves and made the oil stains on the pavement look almost like shadows from the trees. Jamal sat stiffly in the chair, arms folded loosely in his lap, his denim shirt still smelling faintly of smoke and rubber. The reporter clicked her pen once, then leaned forward. "If you could say one thing," she asked gently, "just one thing to explain why you did it, what would you say?" Jamal looked at the camera for a second, then he looked away. His voice came low, slow, like it had been inside him for years, waiting for someone to listen. "I didn't save them to be a hero," he said. "I did it because it was right. But maybe next time, someone like me won't be ignored." The cameraman held still. The air itself seemed to pause. That was all Jamal said. He nodded once and stood, wiping his hands on a rag and heading back into his garage without looking back. There was an engine waiting to be fixed and a carburetor on his bench that wouldn't rebuild itself. But outside the frame, the world kept spinning. The interview aired that same evening on the local 6 o'clock news, and it hit the town like a cold wind through an open door. It wasn't the fire that shocked people. Fires happened. No, what rattled them was the clarity in Jamal's voice, the calm, unflinching honesty. There was no bitterness, no outrage, just a simple truth laid bare. He had been ignored, and people nearly died because of it. In the days that followed, the town began to look at itself hard. The dispatcher, Lily Harding, was suspended pending investigation. Her photo quietly disappeared from the city's Meet the Team webpage. At her hearing, a portion of the 911 call was played aloud. People in the room couldn't meet each other's eyes. The police chief, a man known more for parades than press conferences, issued a public apology from the steps of City Hall. His face was drawn tight, his voice measured. "We failed to act with the urgency every citizen deserves," he said. "We failed Mr. Thomas. We failed the Blake family. And for that, this department is deeply sorry." Cameras clicked. Reporters took notes. But it was the silence among the crowd that said the most. Some people cried. Others clenched their jaws. A few simply stood there, shame and recognition etched into the lines of their faces. Jamal returned to his quiet life, just as he always had. Each morning he opened his shop by 7:30. He refilled the old coffee pot. He wiped down his workbench. He turned the radio low and opened the garage doors wide enough to let in the breeze. Business was steady, but not overwhelming. Just the way he liked it. But things had changed when Mrs. Patel came in for a tire rotation. She brought muffins. The local high school teacher dropped off his son's bike with a note that simply read, "Thank you." Even the teenagers who used to ride by on their scooters with loud music and louder laughter nodded respectfully when they passed Dot at first. Jamal didn't know what to do with the attention. It was awkward, uncomfortable. He'd spent so much of his life being watched with suspicion that being seen with admiration felt like wearing someone else's coat, warm but unfamiliar. And yet, slowly, something in him relaxed. People greeted him now not with forced politeness, but with real warmth, not because he had saved someone's life, but because they had started to see him as fully human. He wasn't that black guy from Berridge anymore. He was Jamal, the man who fixed your brakes, the man who played catch with neighborhood kids on Sunday afternoons, the man who had once worn a firefighter's badge and still carried the instinct to run toward danger, even when the world refused to run with him. The mural downtown was finished by mid. It wasn't large, just a modest painting on the side of an old brick wall. It showed Jamal mid-stride, carrying a child through smoke, his eyes focused, his grip firm. Below the image, someone had painted his words in clean white script. "Maybe next time, someone like me won't be ignored." Tourists came to take pictures. Reporters followed up. A few even tried to get a second interview, but Jamal just smiled and waved them off. He wasn't interested in the spotlight. Not then, not ever. What mattered most wasn't how loud the world applauded. It was the fact that now, when someone like him raised his voice, people listened. And in a town where silence had once nearly cost a family their lives, that was the most powerful change of all. Some lessons arrive like a slap. Sudden, sharp, unforgettable. Others settle quietly, like dust in corners that no one cleans until one day the light hits just right, and we see what's been gathering all along. The town of Elmridge had always considered itself peaceful, safe, a good place to raise kids, they said. Tree-lined streets, weekend farmers markets, porch lights left on more from habit than fear. It had all the right appearances. But appearances, as they learned, can blind you to the truth, even when that truth is calling for help. It took a man covered in soot, dragging 3 coughing children out of a burning home, to teach them the hardest truth of all. When we judge someone by their skin, we risk ignoring the heart that's brave enough to save us. And Jamal Thomas, he never set out to teach a town anything. He didn't ask to be a symbol. He didn't want the murals, the interviews, or the whispers that came in coffee shops after the fire. What he wanted, what he'd always wanted, was to live with dignity, to help where he could, and to be seen for the content of his character rather than the color of his skin. But when he stood on that lawn, smoke still rising behind him, cradling a child who wasn't his, he became the mirror the town didn't know it needed, a mirror that showed them not just his courage, but their hesitation, not just his bravery, but their bias, not just his action, but their silence. The painful part wasn't that no one else ran into the fire. The painful part was that they wouldn't have believed him if he hadn't done it. That when he had made the call clear.com urgent, it had been filed away, delayed, dismissed, because his voice, deep and black and unfamiliar, had not been one they trusted. That's where it started, not in hatred, but in the casualness of assumption, in the way people walked a little wider around him, in the way a woman would lock her car door as he passed, in the way the dispatcher's voice cooled the moment she heard his "We'll send someone when available." Those words rang like a funeral bell days after the fire, haunting more than just the family. They almost failed. It made people uncomfortable. It was supposed to, because prejudice doesn't always wear white hoods or shout across picket lines. Sometimes it whispers behind polite smiles. Sometimes it's in the delay, the doubt, the sideways glance, the voice that says, "Let's wait and see." Even when someone is screaming for help, justice delayed by prejudice could cost lives. Listen, act, respect. That lesson spread through Elmridge like a second kind of fire, not one that destroyed but one that illuminated. Teachers began inviting speakers to talk to their classes about racial profiling, unconscious bias, and the difference between fear and fairness. Church groups hosted uncomfortable but necessary conversations in their fellowship halls. The police department brought in new training consultants, this time led by people who didn't fit the mold they'd always hired from Jamal watched it all from a distance. He didn't stand on stages or hold press conferences. He returned to his shop each day, fixed what was broken, and greeted people with the same quiet dignity he always had. But the way people looked at him changed, not with pity, not with guilt, with respect, not the kind that demands parades or plaques, but the kind that's felt when someone trusts your word, holds your gaze without flinching, and finally sees the full weight of your humanity. And as weeks passed, and the story slowly slipped from headlines to memory, one thing remained etched in the hearts of those who lived in that town. You don't wait to listen until someone runs into a burning building. You listen the first time. You act the first time. Because you never know when the voice you ignore is the one that would have saved your life. One evening, long after the fire had faded into soot-streaked photos and rebuilt siding, Jamal closed his garage early and walked down to Maple Ridge Lane. The Blake family was having a quiet cookout, just neighbors and music and kids with sticky fingers from popsicles. Mrs. Blake waved him over and handed him a plate. One of the toddlers climbed into his lap without hesitation. As Jamal laughed, a soft, genuine sound that hadn't come easy in recent years, someone nearby asked him quietly, "Do you ever think about that day?" He paused, looked at the children, chasing fireflies, the parents chatting on fold-out chairs, the mural glowing faintly down the block. "Sometimes," he said, "but not for what I did." He looked up, eyes steady. "I think about how close we came to learning nothing." Then he stood, smiled gently, and went back to helping the kids with sparklers, because he didn't need to carry the weight of the town's change. He had already lit the match, and it was up to them to keep the fire of awareness burning, not one that destroys but one that keeps watch in the dark.